Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal-Brainspace, the industry's leading AI eDiscovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Socha, weekly with leaders in eDiscovery. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha. I head up brand awareness at Reveal. Each week, I host an episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. My guest this week is Parkash Khatri. He is CEO of Intrepid Managed Discovery. Parkash, welcome.
Thank you, George. How are you doing?
Doing okay. I would like to start, as I do in many of these, talking about you. So if you could start out by letting people know a bit about your background, and then take us to where you are now and what you do today.
Yeah, I'll keep this professional. So depending on how far back when I go. I started my career in internal auditing of all places at a company called Fifth Third Bank in the Midwest, for those of you who live out there in Ohio. And then I transitioned that into a company called Cardinal Health out of Columbus, Ohio, or Dublin, Ohio, to be technical. And then from there, they spun off Medical Technologies Division, called Care Fusion, which was headquartered in San Diego. And that's really where I started dabbling or going outside of internal audit into the eDiscovery and related arenas. I built the in-house eDiscovery division there, ran it for a good 4 or 5 years. And then eventually decided to go fully into consulting side. That fast forward about 8 or 10 years led to starting Intrepid.
What was it that prompted you to expand or move from internal audit to eDiscovery?
Yeah, I think this probably says a little bit more about internal audit, or my feeling of it towards rather than eDiscovery. But internal audit, so when I was in college, one of the things I was trying to think about is, hey, what do I want to do when I start my career, right? And I knew I didn't want to go into programming, but I wanted to be in some type of management role or interact with from a process and workflow and specialization standpoint. So IT audit was a very good fit into that, because it gave me the visibility to talk to VPs and SVPs at a pretty large company, evaluate their process very critically early on, and then be able to critically assess and say what's good and what's not good and what needs to change in compliance with either internal policies or regulatory needs. So PCI standards, for example. I liked doing that work, but at the same time, it was not something that would excite me every day. So I wanted to figure out what that next role is. And it always had to do something with tinkering with computers, right? So whether it was forensics or legal aspects of things. And as I was internally evaluating different roles, we realized that Cardinal Health had a pretty large internal team that was doing eDiscovery work. So I started interacting more and more with that team, and I really liked the work that was happening. And I knew I wanted to go into that team. But interestingly enough, at that time, the spin-off conversation came up. And as part of that spin-off conversation, they're like, hey, do you want to try and lead this group there? And the chief compliance officer at that time, he was also the chief auditor. He ended up giving me the opportunity. I raised my hand as high as I could, and then it just kind of trickled from one thing to another until I was fully responsible for it.
And then how long, I think you mentioned, but how long did you have that responsibility?
eDiscovery side?
Mm-hmm.
That was 3 years, I believe, as a full-time employee there. So interesting enough, right around 3 year mark, something always happens with me where I start thinking, hey, is this it or not? um, and I decided to then get into consulting because internally they didn't have a need for that role to grow. And I think I was 28 or 29 at that time. So I started evaluating and I realized that there was a lot of things that we had done well internally that a lot of my vendors that I was going to didn't even comprehend. A lot of the vendors back in that day had come from the paper side of the business. So e-discovery has just sort of been bolted on as an afterthought, just because that's where the business was going. And having started a division internally from ground up, I thought there were some unique value propositions that we had that I could go to the market with and hopefully advertise and get our name out there.
How did that then take you to where you are today?
Yeah, long process. The, the so when you are in a corporate bubble, so to speak, right? It's just like being in college or high school. You tend to form your network, you tend to form your trust circle, and you become the expert at that point, right? So anyone in a corporation knows, hey, he's our e-discovery or computer forensics or data loss prevention guy. Go talk to them about this need. So one of the biggest things that I realized when it went the consulting side of things is you are a nobody to everyone else, right? So when you knock on those doors, you're like, who the heck are you and why do we care? We got 10 of you here knocking on our doors. So that took me a bit by surprise just because I was a bit naive in my approach on those kind of things, but it was a good lesson learned. And one of the biggest things that I realized is I did not have the ability to market myself, right? I relied on that network and that trust-based approach internally to basically get in front of the clients that I needed to internally, and be able to demonstrate what I did well, and that work product being delivered is what allowed the relationship to grow and us to prosper. So I started trying to develop those business relationship skills. And that led me to go to one of my vendors. At that time, they were acquired, so I moved to a different company. And then I decided to leave them about 3 years ago and start Intrepid Managed Discovery. My goal was always to have something of my own, right? I knew that I don't work well under let's say under other people, and I wanted more accountability and more ownership of that aspect of it, and I really wanted to build a company that functioned more like that in-house group, right? And that's the basics of where we ended up. Now again, with going back to that 3 year pattern, so 3 years ago my daughter was born, my firstborn daughter. I say first because we just had a second one.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Um, so I leave my job. 15 days later, we have my daughter, and 15 days after that, I start Intrepid.
Good timing.
Right. Oh, and then the pandemic.
Right. No stress. Right. So tell me about Intrepid. What does Intrepid do?
Yeah. So we do end-to-end e-discovery services, or discovery services. I'm going to take the E off of it. So data collection, information governance, data collection and identification, data processing, productions, document review. And I took the E part out of it because we also provide deposition and court reporting services. So we're truly doing discovery assistance.
What are some of the lessons you've learned along the way?
Yeah, there are several. I'll focus on maybe the top five. One is specialization, right? When I was in-house, we knew we couldn't do everything, right? So Cardinal Health, as an example, had a team of about 12 people. When we spun off, I had a headcount of 2, including me, right? And it was still, I believe, a $4 billion company with related and similar litigations. So we realized that we could do certain things well in-house and others that we had to find partners to be able to do, right? So specialization there was key in understanding what we could do well versus not. And I think that has carried over to what Intrepid is, right? So we would focus on particular type of litigations. We have particular type of workflows that we deal with. We do add other capabilities on when we need it, or as the client need comes up, but it's always a question of what can we do well, right? anyone can do anything if you throw enough money at it, but that's not the objective, right? The mindset from internal standpoint that I always had was find the most cost effective way of doing something. There has to be a way, and if you keep looking, you will find it, right? And if it's not on this particular project, it'll be the next one, but it has to be there. So that specialization has to be key to it. The key to that specialization is scalability. So that's point number two. Um, Again, with two people and the amount of litigations we had, there was no way that we could stay up 24/7, even if we tried to, and do all the work. So that's where the technology component came into play. When we started, had law pre-discovery and concordance. So that kind of probably dates me at this point. Um, that slowly but surely, actually rather quickly, evolved into more end-to-end discovery solutions, right? So we implemented a system where we could do legal holds through collection, through processing, production, all of that in one system. And this is 12 years ago, I think, that I'm talking about, when people weren't even considering that concept. That saved us so much time and headaches overall that it's not even fathomable. So I took that same mindset when I was starting Intrepid, and the change in technology was that I knew that we as Intrepid did not want to have ownership of the servers, right? We don't want both servers on the ground, create backups, and all the minutia that comes with it. We did it, right? But I mean, aside from implementing things, there's backups, there's offsites, there's security, there's other aspects to be considered from a technology standpoint. All of those are jobs on their own. That's not what an e-discovery company should be doing, right? We're more focused on the discovery process, the consultations related to it. A lot of our client bases tend to be pharma and biotech companies. They don't do other things because they are pharma and biotech companies. So taking that aspect of it, you want to make sure that you have that specialization and you have the technology that allows you to scale. And that's what will bring the cost savings and the efficient workflows that the client tends to appreciate. Third aspect is adaptability. Coming to a new company like CareFusion at that time, a lot of things are changing constantly, right? You have new processes being established, you have old issues that are still there that you have to work through, you have to divest yourself from the parent company. So no one day is the same, and you have to be able to adapt. So similarly, as a vendor now, or a service provider, that's a huge aspect of what we have to do. We have to be able to pivot and go to clients to meet client needs where they need us to meet them. That has helped us differentiate significantly as compared to a lot of these other big box players that are out there. They say, you fit into this mold for us. As a client, you are maybe 1% of our revenue, so we don't really care, right? Whereas a smaller vendor like us is much more adaptable, and we really have a need to adapt to what our clients need, because each dollar that comes in is a much bigger portion of something as compared to a larger vendor that might be. Fourth point is growth and accountability. We set very high standards for ourselves when we were in-house, and I continue to set that as we become completely independent as Intrepid Financial Discovery. That comes from getting clients what they need. That comes from making sure if we do make a mistake, we take ownership of it. That goes to making sure that if there's a need to change, that change is implemented and identified as quickly as possible, and you learn and grow as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you're going to become obsolete very quickly. And last but not the least, and this squarely comes from budgeting processes and in-house, is predictability. Predictability is key across the board, especially for clients. So clients want to know how much something is going to cost, when it's going to come in, and what can we do to make sure that those numbers aren't blown out of proportion, or the work product that comes out of it meets the standard that we have set. That's not only key then for the clients, but also for our employees. Employees need the same thing, and happy employees will give you happy customers.
Okay, now I'd like you to, for a moment, take off your Intrepid Managed Discovery CEO hat and pull out of the closet the old in-house hat. Put that back on. And how would you go about knowing what you know now? How would you go about trying to avoid the problems these issues would raise for you if you were in-house?
Good question, because there were some problems that came up in-house that I wish I had known earlier about. I think having internal ownership is critical. You can't completely and blindly rely on a third party to do something, right? That's not how things work, because as soon as you take your eyes off that ball, nobody else is going to pay attention. So I very first case that I had outsourced, the invoice was supposed to be, I think overall maybe $400,000 for the entire project. I think the very first bill I got was $600,000. Right, so that was a very hard lesson learned, and of course the vendors accommodated, and these are, by the way, $2,000 a gig days, not the current things that we talk about.
Right.
That I think is a key component of any outsourcing model. So as an in-house person, I would say take ownership of, have somebody that has ownership internally of your collections, your understanding of your internal processes, whether that's your in-house counsel or an e-discovery expert that you try and maintain in-house. They then end up managing everything else that comes under it, and keep eyes and critical analysis of that information.
And next, so accountability or ownership rather. Yeah. First, what next?
So these are actually the things that I was trying to run through earlier too. So the specialization, the adaptability, growth.
Yeah. So instead of thinking of these from a service provider or consultant perspective, if you are in that in-house role, how do you address those 5 points?
Yeah. So I think we went through the adapt. Which one did we go through just now? Sorry.
So right now we talked about ownership.
Right. So same thing with growth aspect of it, right? A team, you have to invest time and money in your team, right? You have to be able to train them, send them to certifications, or have them get certifications so they can stay apprised of all the technology out there. That's the thing with technology, is if you don't keep up with it, you become obsolete pretty quickly, right? So that growth aspect of it goes across the board. So if you have that in-house liaison or a few of them, it becomes key. One of the best sources that I found recently, and back in my memory of running those in-house groups, is your vendors, right? There's tons of educational materials out there, ACEDS being one of them. Reveal, I know, has at least a year or two ago, there were some free Brainspace trainings that were happening. I don't know if it's still happening or not. Those certifications.
It has happened. It will happen again.
Okay, great. Yeah. So those certifications are awesome. And there's a lot of good material available for people to stay up to speed. Part of that's going to be continuing to using those skill sets, but that, of course, falls on individual goals.
And I was going to ask, but I think you've already answered to a certain extent. Because you're in-house, you're a cost center.
Yeah.
A cost center isn't the first place to get additional financial resources. At least obtaining and renewing certifications, attending conferences and other educational programs, those all can cost money unless you've got someone who's willing to say, yeah, we'll not charge you or waive the fees. Where do you find the money?
Yeah, so the very first job outside of Cure Fusion I applied for, I used that exact phrase of, hey, I want to go from being a cost center to a profit center, right? In hindsight, what I know is to be true is that you can find, as an in-house person, savings elsewhere and then go to your management and say, hey, we just saved this money. Can I reallocate it? And that conversation goes really, really well. So we, for example, let's say had a budget of $1 million on e-discovery spend, right? And on average, maybe we're spending $200,000. The rest of that money is sitting there somewhere. And if you can demonstrate that you have done something actively to save it, it's very easy to plug and play and move on very quickly. Let's say that's not the case and you're very litigious, or you have one very litigious year. That tends to happen often than not. The keeping up with it, nobody in a corporate setting fights the need to learn more so you can do your job better, right? If you can demonstrate that there's a need for you to understand as an in-house person things your vendors are doing or they're not doing because they are too afraid to even propose that to you, that can be a huge help in getting the budgetary restrictions removed. And these things don't cost that much. I think the most I spent on one person was maybe $6,000-7,000. Part of it depends on how big of a company you are, but for a $4 billion company, that's nothing. You're like, sure, we'll spend the money. And most corporate divisions, especially on the legal side, have CLE credits, right? Those, all lawyers have to maintain those. So there's budgets allocated to that to begin with. So if you happen to fall under the legal division, then it becomes a that much easier conversation to say, hey, this is part of my CLE efforts.
Another of the issues you mentioned was scalability. And it's one thing where if you're on the service provider or the side, scalability is a function of, how much revenue are you bringing in, and how much of that can you allocate to increasing the resources you make available and use. But it's perhaps a different calculation in-house.
Yeah, you don't scale up internally from people standpoint as quickly as you might outside, right? Technology you implement, you depreciate it over 4 or 5 years, whatever the accounting methods say, and you just live with that. People aspect is different because what you don't want to do is temporarily hire and then have to let people go. So that's where the model that we had used was, hey, we will accept certain level of cases internally, right? Whether that's number of gigabytes that have to go through, number of documents that have to go through, or the risk associated with it, right? So if it's a $100 million case, that's not a case that we're going to handle internally. We'd rather offload that to somebody else. So I think knowing that specialization aspect that I was talking about, that then can help you establish scalability of how much you want to scale. Beyond that, our approach obviously was to outsource that aspect of it. But I'm sure if you are big pharma of the world, you have all the money you want to scale up and down. And there's obviously a lot of good temporary talent available to the extent you want it. The challenge with temporary talent is they won't know your systems and your processes as well. And by the time they come up to speed on it, their need may go away. So you just have to balance that out accordingly.
Another of the issues you mentioned was the challenge of and the need to be adaptable and flexible.
Yeah.
What does that look like from an in-house perspective, and how do you address that?
Turn a 24-hour day into a 48-hour day helps a lot. We've had instances where we kind of had to do that. Not that we were literally able to do it, but things will change, right? Things will come up. And beyond a doubt, whether you are a vendor or an in-house person, 5 o'clock on a Friday is the time to start working, right? That's when all the requests come in because all the attorneys have had their meetings throughout the whole week, and now things need to be done, and they have to be done over the weekend. It's much more challenging. It's much more challenging when you're trying to create a work-life balance of some sort. Part of that comes from then allowing your team to be flexible in their downtime, right? I think, and I personally haven't experienced it as an in-house person, but the remote work environment is awesome, right? And back Even back in the day, we were working remotely. We just didn't advertise it or talk about it. Right? It was more of a factor of technology. People can remote into their environment from wherever they want because they realize that not you shouldn't have to restart a physical server every day, right? All of it is, if it's online, if it's working, it's fine. If not, go in there and fix it. So that flexibility is can come from the way you set up your infrastructure, the way you set up your processes, and it's a bit of a harder thing to figure out internally than it is to do it as an external service provider.
In the few minutes we have left here, I'd like you to now take off that internal hat and put the Intrepid Managed Discovery hat back on, and then talk about where this takes you moving forward.
Yeah, good question. We've recently gone through our goal setting exercise as Intrepid Managed Discovery. I'm very, very optimistic about the future. I'm, I guess, an internal optimistic to begin with, because I have to be by design. I think the technology aspect of it will continue to make our life a lot easier. The next big thing that everyone keeps talking about, though it's not an e-discovery concept, is the Chat GPT, I think. I don't know if you ever had a chance to use it, but it's a really, yeah, right. It's a really, really cool technology. And I think that's the direction a lot of things are going to go in. I don't know if e-discovery aspect of the technology is that fluid, but it's a proof of concept, right? And then that's what I'm really excited about is e-discovery to go in that same arena.
So elaborate. I mean, I've seen people do a variety of experiments with Chat GPT. They've mostly focused on generating written content.
Yeah.
Write an article, write a song, write a this, write a that. How would you see that potentially translating into the world of e-discovery?
Yeah, one of the common issues that has been somewhat fixed by bolting on different processes is reuse of work product, right? So in a corporation, there are a lot of serial litigants, especially the C-level folks. They are on every single case and they have the most amount of data stored of anyone else. And when you go from one case to another, it's highly likely you're switching law firms as well. And then, of course, you're switching the content or the topic of that's at dispute. But underneath all of that, there is the common set of data. So I think an AI model like ChatGPT could do really well at understanding the linguistic aspects of what is being talked about, right? So categorization of documents, whether that's privilege versus a certain topics. Again, there's a lot of cluster wheels that Brainspace has and other products have, but I don't think they work as well as a write me a welcome message, or rather, what did I type in? I said a New Year message with inspirational, and it gave me an amazingly well-written message, and I didn't use it, but at the same time, I'm like, this could really be well if you can throw a set of documents at it, and it says, find me all the documents related to XYZ. And if it throws that back at you, I'm like, that would be a really, really cool way to streamline these processes and, quite frankly, make all of us obsolete very quickly.
Yeah, I think that even that isn't going to make us obsolete.
Sure.
There's so much we need to deal with. Yeah, all I've seen in the last 30 years of dealing with e-discovery has been a growing set of things that need to be accomplished, not a diminishing one.
Yeah, I mean, there will always be newer Slack systems and other things that nobody else can handle, and you still need people like us to be able to do it.
Yeah. Well, Parkash, thank you so much for joining me today. Parkash Khatri is the CEO of Intrepid Managed Discovery. I am George Socha. This has been e-Discovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. And once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, George.